All us Chinese food devotees should be so lucky. The Misfortune Cookie by Charles E. Fritsch. With an ease born of long practice, Harry Folger cracked open the Chinese cookie and pulled the slip of paper free. He smoothed it out on the table and read the message printed there. "You will meet an old friend." Harry chuckled to himself. It was inevitable that he would meet an old friend. He met them every day, on his way to work, at the office, in his apartment building, even in the various Chinese restaurants he frequented. He bit into the cookie, crunched the remnants between his teeth, and washed them down with a swig of the now lukewarm tea. He enjoyed the fortune cookie as much as the fortune itself. But then, he enjoyed everything about the Chinese food that he always ate, without ever tiring of it. The chow mein, the chop suey, the chicken fried rice, the wonton, the egg foo young, oh, why go on? Heaven, to Harry Folger, was eating in a Chinese restaurant. And as he was leaving the place, he met an old friend. Her name was Cynthia Peters, or had been until she married. She was not old in the chronological sense, however, but a young woman, not yet in her 30s. Harry had fond memories of the tempestuous affair he had experienced with the lady when both were younger, and frequently his dreams were filled with such pleasant recollections. "Cynthia," he said, surprised but pleased. "Harry!" she exclaimed, tears of sudden happiness welling in her hazel green eyes. And Harry knew that despite the fact they were both married, he was going to have an affair with her. When he finally got around to thinking about it, Harry marveled at the coincidence of his meeting old friend Cynthia right after a fortune cookie had forewarned him of such an occurrence. It was a coincidence, of course, for it could be nothing else. Harry enjoyed reading the messages, written, he always assumed, by coolie labor somewhere in Hong Kong, but he did not believe them to contain the absolute truth. Not just then, he didn't. The meeting places of himself and Cynthia were, needless to say, Chinese restaurants. Her husband, she told him, was a beast who made her life miserable. His wife, he informed her, was a bitch with whom he was quite unhappy. On one of these occasions, after a delicious meal of sweet and sour spare ribs, Harry cracked open his fortune cookie to discover this message. "Watch out! Someone is following you." He looked up to discover Cynthia's irate husband entering the restaurant. There was barely time enough to spirit her out the rear exit. There would have been no time at all if the Chinese fortune cookie hadn't alerted Harry to the imminent danger. Coincidence again, Harry decided, until he received a similarly worded message an instant before his wife, who hated Chinese food, entered the restaurant where he and Cynthia were eating. And once again, Harry escaped in the nick of time. As a result, Harry began taking the messages more seriously. He was hoping for some invaluable tip on the stock market, or some winning horse in Saturday's race, but none came. For the most part, except for emergencies, the messages were bland bits of wisdom and random advice, with one notable exception. It occurred as he and Cynthia, who, like him, loved Chinese food, were finishing off the remaining morsels of mandarin duck, and she was telling how suspicious her husband was getting, and how sure she was that Harry's own wife must not be blind to the secret rendezvous. At that precise moment, Harry cracked open a crisp fortune cookie, pulled out the slip of paper, and read, "You are going to die." Harry gulped and almost choked on the piece of cookie in his mouth. It was ridiculous, of course. Then his attitude changed abruptly to one of indignation. What the hell kind of message was that for some underpaid coolie in Hong Kong to stuff into a fortune cookie? He thought of complaining to the manager, but he changed his mind. Instead, he decided he didn't feel well. He took Cynthia home, letting her off in front of her apartment. As he was about to drive off, he heard a noise at the opposite window. He looked to see Cynthia's husband pointing a gun at him. He gasped flung open the car door and scrambled out, bumping into his wife, who also had a gun in her hand. Harry ran. He was vaguely aware that 2 guns fired simultaneously, but he felt no pain and was not about to stop his flight. He ran, not pausing for breath until he was a good 4 blocks away. Then he leaned against a building, dragging in lungfuls of air to take inventory. There didn't seem to be any holes in him, nor was there any sign of blood. Thank God, he thought, for the lousy aim of the 2 irate spouses. Even so, he was shaking uncontrollably. He had to go someplace and relax. They might still be after him, and he'd be safer in a crowded place. He looked up at the building to see where he was. He was standing in front of a Chinese restaurant. It was one he'd never been to before, and his curiosity was aroused. Also his appetite, although he'd eaten a Chinese meal only an hour before. Besides, he always felt secure in such a place. Harry Folger walked in, sat at a table. Surprisingly, he was the only person there. When a waiter appeared, Harry ordered the number 2 dinner. He ate it, enjoying each mouthful, forgetting the unpleasant episode in the street. Then he cracked open his fortune cookie and read the message that had been tucked inside. The words didn't register at first. When they did, he looked up in sudden panic to see the waiter grinning derisively with a skull face. Harry looked around wildly for a way out, but there were no doors or windows in the restaurant. No way to get out now or ever. He started screaming. When he tired of that, he felt hungry again. He ordered another meal, ate it. The message in the fortune cookie this time was exactly as the first. He had another meal after that one, and another after that, and another after that. And each time, the message in the fortune cookie was the same. It said, "You're dead."